This is the first frame. An apple, heavy with fruit, stars behind it, a low moon, but at the base of the tree, standing on two legs, a tall, pale figure covered head to foot in light hair, one long arm raised into the branches, reaching. Not a man, not a bear, standing upright of the tree like it owns it, reaching for the fruit in a way you would. And this is the calmest thing on the camera, because it gets much worse from here.
Next frame, and the figure has changed too. Darker, heavier, and it's not on the ground anymore. It's in the tree. One arm in the leaves, a leg reaching for a lower branch. The whole mass of it hauled up into the canopy the way something half its size would climb. Next frame, higher, next, settled into the fork of the trunk, arms pulled in, feeding. 30 feet up, in the dark, comfortable. And then the last frame. It turns, it looks at the camera, eyes catching the light and throwing it back down the lens like it knew exactly where the little machine was hidden the whole time. 5 frames, 1 camera, the Ozark Woods, 1999. Sent to me decades later by 4 men who swore each other to silence and then finally broke it. The pictures are strange on their own. It's everything around them, the years before and the nights after, that I haven't been able to put down. These are the actual frames the men sent me. Over the course of this video, I'm going to show you each one exactly as it came, and I'm going to tell you only what is actually in them. Nothing added, nothing invented. That's a promise I make to you on every one of these. And on this one, it matters more than usual because the temptation to fill in the blanks on images like these is enormous, and I'm not going to do it.
I'm Alex. I've looked at a lot of images on this channel, a lot of blurry shapes and shadows that turned out to be branches, dogs, deer, and of course the occasional grown man in a costume, hoping to fool the internet. But what you are seeing right now, this sequence, is one I need to take a closer look.
Not because it's the clearest thing I've ever seen, but because of who sent it, why they sat on it for as long as they did, and because of what they say happened on that land after these pictures were taken. The images are unsettling on their own. The story around them is worse. Because here is the part that should bother you the same way it bothers me. 4 men own this orchard. 4 men walked it, worked it, hunted the woods around it for years. And in all that time, across everything they say they witnessed, not one of them was ever standing there when it happened. The apples vanished on the nights nobody came. The figures arrived when the orchard was empty. Whatever this is, it seems to know when the people are gone. And the obvious, uncomfortable question, the one this whole video is going to circle, is a single word. How?
To understand what's looking back at the camera and what these men say it did next, we have to go back to the beginning, to the land itself. And if you wanted to design a place where something large could live for a very long time without being caught, you would have a hard time improving on the Ozarks.
Spread across southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, and the edges of Oklahoma, the Ozark region is one of the oldest, most rugged, most heavily forested landscapes in the middle of the country. We're talking millions of acres of steep hollows, limestone caves, spring-fed creeks, and hardwood ridges that fold over one another for as far as you can see. There are corners of the Ozark National Forest that a human being might not set foot in for years at a stretch. It is exactly the kind of terrain where a careful, intelligent animal could move through the dark and never once be seen. And the people who live there have been reporting something in those hollows for a very, very long time. The most famous case, the one most of you already know, came out of the swampy lowlands at the edge of Ozark country, Fuke, Arkansas. In 1971, the Ford family said a tall, hair-covered creature reached through a window of their farmhouse in the middle of the night, and that a man was injured in the chaos that followed. The story became the 1972 film The Legend of Boggy Creek, which I'd remind you is a dramatized retelling and not a documentary. But the sightings around Fook were real reports made by real frightened people. And they did not begin or end with that one night. The thing locals called the Fook monster had been described in that region for generations. Beyond Fook, there's a whole quieter tradition. Reports of an Ozark wild man go back into the 1800s. There are the stories of the so-called Ozark howler, which I'll be honest with you, sits much closer to folklore than to document its sighting, and I'm not going to dress it up as more than that. But underneath the folklore, there is a steady, century-long drumbeat of ordinary people in this specific part of the country saying the same kind of thing. There is something big out here. It walks on two legs, and it does not want to be seen. So when an account comes in from this region, it does not arrive in a vacuum. It arrives in a place that already had a name for the thing being described, long before the men who sent me these pictures were ever born. Think for a moment about the practical reality of hiding in country like this. The Ozark National Forest alone runs to well over 1 million acres. Add the Mark Twain National Forest across the Missouri side, the Ouachitas to the south, and the endless patchwork of private timberland and abandoned homesteads in between, and you have a contiguous block of wild, broken, forested country, measured not in acres but in thousands of square miles. Much of it has no roads, some of it has no trails. The hollows are so steep and so densely wooded that you can stand 100 yards from another person and never know they're there. Water is everywhere, springs and creeks and underground rivers. Food is everywhere, in season. If you were a large animal that wanted to avoid people, this is not a place you would merely survive. It is a place you would thrive quietly for as long as you were careful. And that's the piece skeptics tend to wave away too quickly. The usual objection to a large unknown primate in North America is, where are they? Why don't we trip over them? Spend one day trying to walk a straight line through an Ozark hollow, and that objection starts to feel a lot weaker. There is more than enough room out there to hide something that does not want to be found, especially something patient, nocturnal, and smart. Now, I owe you some honesty about where this particular account comes from, and I'm only going to say this once. This story was not pulled from a newspaper or a database. It came to this channel directly by email from the men who say they lived it. They came forward after a long stretch of deliberation, and they came forward on one firm condition, that the exact location stays buried. Not the county, not the nearest town, nothing that could put a pin on a map. I agreed to that, and I want to be straight with you about why I agreed, because it matters. Their reasoning was simple, and the more I sat with it, the more sense it made. If word got out that there was a reliable, repeatable food source in the Ozarks where these things come to feed, that orchard would be overrun inside a week. Hunters, hoaxers, thrill seekers, people with rifles and people with cameras trampling the place, and worse. These men believed they would be destroying not just their own quiet way of life on that land, but the animals themselves. So they drew a line, they would tell the story, they would send the pictures, they would not give up the place. And everything in this video that isn't one of those images is their account, told as they told it to me. I personally think the orchard is the real key to this whole thing, more than the camera, more than any single frame. Predators don't repeat themselves like this. Foragers do. Something that comes back to the same tree, the same fruit, the same season, year after year, isn't hunting, it's harvesting. And that changes the entire character of what we're looking at. The way it was told to me, it started as nothing more than a good deal between friends. 4 of them, all hunters, all the kind of men who'd known each other long enough to trust each other with money. They pooled what they had and bought a remote parcel of Ozark land. the sort of place that's cheap precisely because it's hard to get to and harder to do anything with. It came with an old apple orchard already on it, planted by somebody long gone, half wild now, but still bearing fruit every fall. The trees were established, gnarled, productive. To 4 hunters, that orchard wasn't a hobby. It was a magnet. Apples on the ground in autumn mean deer, and deer mean a hunting season worth having. None of them lived on the property. That's an important detail, and it stays important all the way to the end of the story. They had homes and jobs elsewhere, and the land was something they tended in rotation, driving out on their own schedules to do the work a piece of backcountry always needs. Clearing brush, mending fence, checking the trees, walking the woods that bordered the orchard where they hunted. One of them might be out there for a weekend, then nobody for a week, then another of them for a few days. The land was rarely empty for long, but it was almost never full either. There was usually no one there at night. For the first stretch, it was everything they'd hoped for. Then the apples started disappearing. Not the way you'd expect. Deer browse the windfall, the fruit on the ground. Bears will come through and make a mess, breaking low limbs, leaving scat, leaving sign you can read. This was different. The men would come out and find fruit stripped clean from high up in the trees, branches snapped well above the height a black bear can reach even standing on his hind legs. And there was a tidiness to it that bothered them. Whole sections of a tree picked cleanly from up high, with none of the wreckage a bear leaves behind. They argued about it the way friends do. One of them, half joking, said it sounded like the Boggy Creek thing, the old Fook story everyone in that part of the world grows up hearing. The others laughed him off. The far more likely answer, the boring answer, was people. Kids from the nearest road coming in to swipe apples for the hell of it. Or worse, somebody scouting their land, learning their patterns, maybe getting ready to poach the deer they were working so hard to draw in. And that, more than anything, is what put the camera in the tree. Not monsters, trespassers. They wanted to catch a human being. They wanted a face they could take to a neighbor, or, if it came to it, to the county sheriff. I want you to sit with that because it's the detail that makes everything after it land so much harder. These 4 men did not set out to film a legend. They set out to catch a thief. It's worth lingering on how reasonable that was. Put yourself in their boots. You've sunk your savings into a piece of land. You drive 2 hours to reach it. You're putting in the labor to make the orchard produce, to draw the deer, to build the thing you all dreamed about over beers. And every time you come back, more of your fruit is gone, taken from high in the trees, with a strange neatness to it. You don't think Sasquatch. Nobody sane thinks Sasquatch first. You think some kid is sneaking onto your land, or some neighbor resents the out-of-towners who bought the parcel, or somebody's casing the place. You think about the deer you're trying to protect and the money you've put in, and you do the obvious, practical thing. You set a camera to catch the person responsible so you can put a stop to it. There's something almost tragic in that looking back. The most ordinary, level-headed response in the world, setting a trap for a petty thief, is the exact thing that put a lens on something none of them were remotely prepared to see.
They were trying to solve a small, irritating, human-sized problem. The camera had other ideas. Remember that as we go. They were expecting a person, a teenager with a bag of stolen apples. That is the entire reason this camera existed. And it's worth stopping for a second on what a trail camera actually was in 1999, because the technology shapes everything you're about to see.
This was not a modern unit. There was no crisp, high-definition video, no infrared movie footage, no app pinging your phone the moment something walks by. A camera like this fired single, still frames when a motion sensor tripped, and the sensor was slow. By the time the shutter actually opened, a fast-moving animal could already be halfway out of the frame. There was no sound, there was no second chance. You got one picture, maybe a couple if whatever set it off lingered, and then you waited, sometimes for days or weeks, until somebody drove out, pulled the card or the film, and finally got to see what the woods had been doing while no one was around. So the men set their camera facing the orchard, aimed at the trees that were losing the most fruit, and they left. And then ordinary life did what it does. The drive was long, the work was elsewhere, and it was a stretch before anyone made it back out to see what they'd caught. And that gap matters because it's a thing modern technology has almost erased, and it's hard to put yourself back inside. There was no notification, no live feed, no checking your phone from the couch to see what walked by. The camera sat out there alone, night after night, firing in the dark at things none of them could see, banking its single frozen frames onto film or onto an early card, and not one human being had any idea what was accumulating on it. Whatever visited that orchard in those weeks visited it in complete privacy. The men were, in the most literal sense, in the dark. When they finally pulled that first card, the way it was told to me, they were standing around expecting to see a kid, a neighbor, a poacher caught mid-sneak. Instead, they got the pale figure at the tree. The tall one standing on two legs, reaching up into the branches. And the argument started immediately, because the human brain, when it's handed something it isn't ready for, reaches for the nearest ordinary explanation it can find. "It's a costume," one of them said, "somebody in a suit messing with us." "It's a deer," said another, "a deer up on its hind legs stretching for the high apples, blurred by the slow shutter into something that only looks like it's standing. It's a trick of the flash, it's shadows. It's anything at all except the thing it actually looks like." But the proportions wouldn't sit still under those explanations. The length of that raised arm, the height of the reach, the way the weight was balanced on two legs, upright, easy, not the strained half rear of a deer about to drop back onto all fours. Every time one of them talked himself into the boring answer, he'd look at the frame again and the boring answer would slide back off it. I personally think that if it had stopped at that one image, they'd have talked themselves all the way out of it, and you and I would never have heard a word about this orchard. One strange picture is easy to bury. The mind wants the easy answer, and it will work hard to keep it. It took more than one night to break that down, and the camera was still out there, still working, still firing in the dark every time something crossed in front of it. Here's the thing that, for me, takes this story out of the pile of blurry one-offs and stands it on its own. It wasn't the same creature. The pale figure from the first image stood on the ground, light-haired, reaching up. But the frames that came off the later card showed something different. Darker, heavier built. And instead of standing at the base reaching up, this one climbed, fully up into the tree, into the fork where the trunk divides, settling its weight onto the branches and feeding from inside the canopy. Different nights, different light, a different animal. Think about what that does to the hoax theory, because it effectively ends it. If you wanted to fake this, you would have to do something genuinely absurd. You would have to haul not one, but two different costumes out to a remote orchard that almost no one can find. You'd have to do it on multiple separate nights in different seasons, with snow on the ground in some frames and not in others. You'd have to climb 30 feet up an apple tree in a heavy suit in the dark and pose convincingly enough to fool a camera you'd have to know was there. And you'd have to do all of it for an audience of exactly nobody, because remember, no one was living on that land. There was no internet fame waiting. No one to gasp at the trick. A hoax needs a victim and a payoff. This had neither. It was just happening over and over, whether anyone was watching or not. Now let me be careful and honest about what we can and can't say. We cannot prove these are two members of one family. We can't even prove the lighter one and the darker one ever met. What we can say is what the frames show, that at least two distinctly different individuals of noticeably different size and color were using the same orchard as a food source across different nights and different seasons. One reaching from the ground, one comfortable up in the canopy. And there's a behavioral wrinkle worth pausing on because it's the kind of thing that's easy to miss. The two creatures didn't just differ in size and color, they fed differently. The pale one in that first frame worked the tree from the ground, standing and reaching, taking the fruit it could get to from below. The dark one climbed all the way up and fed from inside the canopy, from the high branches the ground feeder couldn't reach. If you want to read something into that, and I'll flag clearly that this is me reading into it, you could see it as exactly the kind of division you'd expect between individuals of different size, age, or confidence. A bolder, more agile climber going high. A heavier or more cautious one staying low. That's speculation, and I'm labeling it as speculation. But it's the sort of detail a hoaxer wouldn't think to fake because it isn't dramatic, it's just behavior. And that pattern, more than any single picture, is what raises the hair on my neck. Because in our episode on the evidence for juvenile and infant Bigfoot, the one a lot of you have asked me to follow up on, the strongest cases all share this exact signature. Not a lone wanderer, but multiple individuals of different sizes at a single reliable food source. A smaller one and a larger one, working the same tree. That's not what a sighting looks like. That's what a population looks like.
One creature at a tree is a sighting. Two creatures, two sightings at the same tree across different nights is something else. That is a group. That's a place they keep coming back to. And I personally think the two Bigfoot detail is the whole story. And it's the part I most wish I could put under a better lens. One blurry giant at an apple tree I can hold at arm's length. Two of them, different builds, treating one orchard like a standing appointment is the kind of thing that keeps me up. You don't get a second costume by accident.
I want to slow all the way down now and do the part of this video I take most seriously, which is telling you exactly what is in these images and refusing to tell you anything that isn't. In the first frame, the moonlit one, here is what is genuinely there. A tall figure standing upright on two legs on the ground beside the apple tree. It is covered in light-colored hair, pale against the dark behind it. One arm is raised up into the branches, reaching. You can see the full standing height of it, head to foot. Behind it, the sky is clear and full of stars, and the moon is up. That is what the frame supports. I'm not going to give you a height in feet because there is nothing in that frame to measure it against. I'm not going to tell you the color of its eyes or the expression on its face because in that first image you cannot see a face. I'm telling you what's there. In the later frames, the darker creature, here is what's there. A heavier, dark-haired figure up in the tree. In one frame, it's mid-climb, one leg reaching down toward a lower branch, an arm up in the leaves. In another, it's settled into the fork of the trunk, arms pulled in, feeding from the canopy, its body turned so you catch the side of its head. And in the closest frame, it's seated in that fork facing the camera, one arm raised into the branches above it, and its eyes are catching the light and reflecting it back. There are apples visible in the branches around it. There's snow in patches on the ground behind. That is what is there. Now here is what I cannot tell you, and I won't pretend otherwise. I can't tell you from a still frame at night how tall these things truly are. I can't tell you their real color in daylight, because a night exposure lies about color. I can't tell you whether the pale one and the dark one are related or rivals or strangers who happen to like the same tree. And I can't give you continuous motion because this old camera never captured any. Every one of these is a frozen instant with darkness on either side of it. I have to address the obvious counter because if I don't, one of you will, and you'll be right to. Could this be a bear? It's the first thing a skeptic says, and it deserves a real answer, not a dismissal. Black bears live in the Ozarks. Bears climb. Bears love an apple tree. A bear up in a canopy, caught at a bad angle by a slow shutter, can absolutely look strange. I'll go further than most cryptid channels would and say the bear explanation is the single most serious challenge to these images, and it should be. The Ozark black bear population has rebounded hard over the last few decades. There are real bears in real apple trees out there tonight. Any honest look at these frames has to put a bear at the top of the mundane explanation list and take it seriously, not wave it off as a skeptic's reflex. I'd be doing you a disservice if I pretended otherwise, but walk through it with me. The first figure is standing fully upright on two legs on the ground, with one arm extended overhead, a posture a bear holds for seconds at most, not the relaxed stance these frames show. The climber sits in the fork of the tree with the build of something broad through the shoulders and long in the arms, feeding while facing outward. Bears are bulk and muscle and a long snout. The shape in these frames reads differently, more upright, more long-limbed. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it is physically impossible that some of this is a bear at a strange angle. What I'll tell you is that the bear explanation has to stretch further with each frame, and it never fully covers the standing posture of that first pale figure. The ambiguity is real. I'm leaving it real. You're going to look at these and decide for yourself, which is exactly how it should be. After the shock of the images wore off, the men did something that turned a handful of creepy pictures into something genuinely unsettling. They started keeping track. They logged when the camera fired. They noted which cards had figures on them and which didn't. And over time, as they pulled card after card across more than one season, a shape started to emerge from the noise. The visits weren't random, they clustered. They came in around the time the apples ripened, the narrow window each year when that fruit is at its best. And within that window, the nights with figures on them lean toward the brighter phases of the moon, which lines up with that very first frame, the one lit up clear enough to show a whole star field behind a pale body. Read that back and feel the weight of it. This wasn't a creature that wandered through once and was never seen again. This was something that came back, on a schedule, to the same trees, tied to the season and, it seemed, to the light. The orchard wasn't a place one of these things stumbled across on a bad night. It was a stop, a known, reliable return to source of food on whatever route these animals walk through that country. That word, route, is worth dwelling on. Large foraging animals don't drift at random. They learn their territory with a precision that would put most of us to shame, and they build their movements around the places that reliably produce food at predictable times. A stand of oaks dropping acorns, a berry patch in July, a creek where the fish run, and apparently an old apple orchard that fruits every fall. To an animal smart enough to keep that map in his head, that orchard wasn't a surprise and it wasn't a treat. It was a scheduled stop marked on a mental calendar, visited when the apples were ready and the moon was bright enough to work by. The men had, without knowing it, bought a parcel that sat squarely on something's regular rounds. And this is where the story turns over and shows you its underside, because once you understand it as a regular stop on a foraging route, a quiet inversion clicks into place. And it's the part that the men say they could never quite shake. They thought they had bought an orchard. They thought, when they pooled their money for that cheap remote parcel, that they were buying a thing they would own and use and profit from, a magnet for the deer they wanted to hunt. But the orchard was already spoken for.
Something had been working those trees season after season, long before the four hunters ever signed a piece of paper. They did not buy a food source. They bought a seat at the edge of someone else's table, and they did not find out until the camera told them. They didn't discover the orchard. something else discovered it first, and had been coming back to it for who knows how long before any human put money down on the land.
If there's a quiet, reliable food source somewhere in the woods near you, an old orchard, a stand of nut trees, a place where something could come back to feed year after year without ever being seen, that is exactly the kind of thing this channel exists to chase down. If that's the rabbit hole you like going down, subscribe and stick around, because this story is not the only one of its kind sitting in my inbox. And it is not even the strangest. Before I get to the part that changed the land for them, I want to talk about what the pictures alone did to 4 ordinary men, because it's a piece of these stories that almost never gets told, and I think it's the most human thing in the whole account. These were not nervous people. They were hunters, grown men who'd spent their lives in the woods, comfortable in the dark, comfortable with blood and field dressing and the ordinary dangers of the backcountry. The woods did not scare them. That was the entire point of the place. And the way it was told to me, the images broke something in that comfort that none of them quite got back. It came out in small ways at first, a reluctance to be the one who drove out alone. A new habit of finishing the work before the light went instead of lingering into the evening the way they used to. Jokes that started landing a little flat, a little forced, because under the joking, everybody had seen the same frames and nobody had a good answer for them. One of them, by the account, stopped sleeping out there entirely. The orchard was still theirs on paper. It just stopped feeling like a place you'd want to close your eyes in. And I think that's worth taking seriously as its own kind of evidence in its limited way. Not proof of what the creature is, nothing like that. But 4 men don't rearrange how they use a piece of land they paid for, don't give up the easy solo weekends, don't quietly start treating their own property as something to be careful around, over a picture they secretly believe is a costume or a deer. Whatever they actually saw on those cards, they believed it enough to change their behavior around it for years. That belief cost them something. People don't pay that price for a joke. Now here's the part they sat on the longest, the part that turned unease into something colder. It started with the woods around the orchard. On one of the upkeep trips, the way it was told to me, one of the men came across an arrangement of saplings near the tree line that stopped him cold. Young trees bent over, not snapped, bent, the trunks curved down, and the tops tucked or wedged into the brush, in a way that wind doesn't do, and that a man would have to work to do on purpose. He'd walked that ground a dozen times. It hadn't been like that before. I'll be straight with you, that strange tree formations are a thread that runs through a lot of these accounts, including others I've covered on this channel, so take it for what it is. One more piece of the men's testimony, not proof of anything on its own. Then it moved to the cameras themselves, and this is the detail that I genuinely can't talk myself out of. The camera started getting moved. A unit they'd aimed carefully at a particular tree would be found knocked askew, pointed off at empty brush. One, they said, was turned to face the dirt. They argued about it, the way they argued about everything. Wind, a raccoon, a branch coming down. Every mundane answer got floated. But a camera bumped by a falling branch falls down. It doesn't get turned around to face a new direction. And the timing was the thing. The cameras went wrong in exactly the spots where the figures had been showing up. Whatever was coming to those trees had at some point become aware of the little machines watching it, and had started doing something about them. That's the line that the whole story crosses and never comes back from. An animal doesn't care about a camera. A deer walks past it. A bear might sniff it and move on. But something that finds a hidden camera, understands enough to know it doesn't belong and turns it away, is operating on a different level than the word animal really allows. It's the difference between being watched by the woods and being watched back. And think about what it would take. To turn a camera, the thing first has to notice it. A small, dull, motionless object. deliberately placed to blend in, mounted at the edge of a tree. It has to register that the object is new, that it doesn't belong, that it is in some sense pointed at it. And then it has to decide to do something about it and reach out and move it. Every step in that chain requires a kind of awareness we don't grant to deer or raccoons or even bears. It requires something closer to the way a person notices a security camera and tilts it toward the wall. That is the behavior the men describe in the specific spots where the figures appeared, on the nights they appeared. I can't tell you with certainty that's what happened. I can tell you it's what they say happened, and I can tell you it's the part that, by their account, frightened them more than any single image ever did. And it changed how they used the place. The men stopped coming alone. The casual solo weekends tapered off. The thing they'd bought as a getaway, a quiet piece of backcountry to hunt and tinker on, had become a place where, after dark, they no longer felt like the ones in charge. They never described being chased. They never described being attacked. I want to be careful and precise here. What they describe is not violence. It's awareness. It's the slow, creeping certainty that the orchard had a tenant, that the tenant knew they were there, and that the tenant had started paying attention to them in return. I personally think the moved cameras are the single hardest part of this to explain away, harder than any one image. A blurry giant in a tree I can argue about all day. A hidden camera that keeps getting found and turned to face the wrong way by something out in those specific woods on those specific nights is a different kind of problem. And it's the part I'd most want to ask these men about face to face. So let's lay the possibilities on the table honestly, because you've been patient and you deserve the real spread, not a sales pitch. The mundane explanations come first, and they're not nothing. Bears, as we covered, can account for some of this, especially the climbing and the fruit, even if they strain against the standing posture and the deliberate move cameras. Misidentification is always on the table when you're working from slow night exposures with nothing in frame for scale. And a human hoax is the explanation skeptics reach for first. But the hoax theory in this specific case has to swallow some very hard fact. 2 different creatures, multiple seasons, a location almost no one could find, no audience, no payoff, and a slow 1999 camera nobody was tending most of the time. People fake Bigfoot for attention. There was no attention here to be had. And then there's the explanation. This channel has never been shy about taking seriously that what came to that orchard was exactly what it appears to be. A large, intelligent, upright animal unrecognized by science, foraging a reliable food source on a seasonal route through some of the most remote country in the central United States. Possibly more than one, possibly a pair or a family group given the 2 distinct sizes. Not a ghost, not a one-night wonder, but a flesh and blood thing that eats apples, climbs trees, and is smart enough to notice when it's being filmed. I'm not going to stand here and tell you the images prove that. They don't. Images almost never do. But I'll tell you what I keep landing on. The cryptid explanation is the only one on the table that accounts for the whole pattern at once. The standing posture and the climbing and the 2 different animals and the seasonal return and the moved cameras without having to invent a hoaxer with no motive. Or stretch a bear across postures bears don't hold. Every other answer explains a piece and drops the rest. That's the test I try to apply to all of these, and it's the test I'd encourage you to apply too. Don't ask which explanation can account for one frame. Almost any explanation can account for one frame. A bear covers the climber. A blurry deer covers the standing reach. A prankster covers the face in the lens. The question that actually matters is which single explanation can carry all of it at the same time, the whole chain without snapping somewhere in the middle. And when I line these pieces up, the bear has to drop the standing posture, the hoaxer has to invent a motive and an audience that don't exist. The misidentification has to ignore the deliberate return on a seasonal schedule. The only thread that runs the entire length of the story without breaking is the one this channel has never been afraid to name. That isn't proof. I keep saying that on purpose. But it's a pattern, and patterns are how these things get taken seriously in the first place. And none of this happened nowhere. This is Ozark country, the same broad landscape that gave us Fook and the Boggy Creek reports, and a century of wild man stories before that. These 4 men weren't the first to say there's something out there in those hollows that walks like us and isn't us. They were just the ones who happened to leave a camera running while it ate. It's worth remembering, too, that the European settlers who pushed into the Ozarks were latecomers to a land that had been read and named for thousands of years before them. The Osage, who gave the region its name, and the peoples who hunted and traveled this country long before any orchard was planted, carried their own accounts of large, hair-covered beings in the deep woods, the way nearly every culture on this continent did. I'm not going to put specific words in any specific tradition's mouth because I don't have the ethnographic sourcing in front of me to do that responsibly, and you know I won't fake it. But the broad point stands, and it's a fair one. The idea of a tall, upright, forest-dwelling other is not something 4 modern hunters invented when they pulled a strange card out of a camera. It's one of the oldest stories this land has, and they stumbled into the middle of it. I keep coming back to that one question from the very beginning. In all those years, across everything they say they saw, the men were never once standing in the orchard when it happened. The apples went on the empty nights. The figures came when no one was there. The camera caught what the men never could, because the moment a person was on that land, whatever this is simply didn't come. Sit with what that implies. It means the thing in those frames wasn't just passing through, it was reading them, learning their patterns the same way they'd worried a human poacher might. Knowing when the trucks were gone, when the lights were off, when the orchard belonged for a few dark hours to whatever wanted it. They bought the land, but they were never really alone on it, and they were never really in charge of it after dark. And here's the thing I respect about these 4 men. As much as the story unnerves me, they broke years of silence to tell it. They sent the pictures, they let me show you the face in the tree. And they still, to this day, will not give up the one detail that could undo it all, the place. Not to protect a secret for its own sake, but because they believe that if that orchard were ever found, it would be the end of it. For their quiet life on that land, and for whatever it is that's been coming to feed there since before they ever arrived. They came forward to share it and to guard it in the same breath. I think that's the most honest thing in this whole account. I want to say something about that choice because I think it's the thing that separates this account from a lot of what crosses my desk. The easiest thing in the world, if you wanted attention, would be to name the spot. Drop the coordinates, watch the views pour in, let the circus come to town. The men did the opposite. They handed over the part that's frightening and kept back the part that's valuable. That's not how hoaxers behave. Hoaxers want you to come look. These men want you to stay away, and they want it badly enough that they nearly didn't send the pictures at all. Whatever you make of the images, the shape of their decision tells you something about how seriously they take what's out there. The Ozarks have one more story I've been holding on to, one that sits in the same dark country as this one. And I'll tell you now, it's worse than what you just heard. That one's coming soon, and when it does, I think you'll understand why I waited. But for tonight, I'll leave you where the camera left them. An old apple tree in the Ozark dark, the high branches stripped of fruit, a pale shape on the ground with one long arm raised into the leaves, and a darker shape up in the canopy with its eyes turned down the lens, looking back at the little machine and at us, and at the empty orchard that was never quite as empty as four men believed when they bought it.
Whatever it was there first. It may still be there now, and the only people who know exactly where will never tell you, for the creature's sake as much as their own. And I hope you enjoyed this encounter that one of the viewers sent me, and if you yourself have anything I can work with, do let me know. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.